We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Cracks in the Foundation. Arthur Manning traced his finger along the brochure's glossy surface, imagining Bethany's reaction to the secluded cabin nestled in the Poconos. The photographs showcased a rustic yet elegant retreat, complete with a stone fireplace and private hot tub overlooking the mountains. Perfect for their upcoming anniversary. He'd spent weeks planning this surprise, coordinating with the property manager to arrange special touches. Her favorite wine chilling in the refrigerator, fresh flowers arranged throughout the space, and a couple's massage scheduled for their first morning. The thought of spending uninterrupted time together made him smile. Lately, their interactions had felt rushed, mechanical even, as Bethany threw herself into her new position at Maxwell Corp. The sound of keys in the door pulled Arthur from his thoughts. He quickly tucked the brochure into his desk drawer as Bethany entered their home office. "You're home early," he said, rising to greet her. Bethany barely glanced his way as she deposited her handbag on the corner chair. "Just needed to grab some files I left here this morning." She massaged her temples, her perfectly manicured nails gleaming under the office lights. "God, my head is killing me." Arthur's excitement dimmed slightly. "Another migraine?" She rifled through a stack of papers on her desk. "This new project is brutal. The deadlines are impossible. Maybe that's exactly why you need a break," Arthur ventured, moving closer. "I was thinking." "Not now, Arthur." Bethany's voice carried an edge he'd grown increasingly familiar with over the past year. "I need to focus on work. Some of us don't have the luxury of taking time off whenever we want." The barb stung, but Arthur pushed forward. "I've actually planned something special for us this weekend. A surprise getaway to..." "This weekend?" Bethany's head snapped up, her expression a mix of panic and irritation. "I can't possibly leave now. Not with everything going on at work." "It's our anniversary," Arthur reminded her quietly. "I know what it is." She gathered her papers with sharp movements. "But I have responsibilities, Arthur. Real ones. Not just sketching buildings that may never get built." Arthur watched her slip the papers in her leather portfolio, noting how she avoided his gaze. "We can reschedule," he offered, though the words tasted bitter. "Maybe next month?" "Sure, whatever." Bethany's phone buzzed, and she immediately checked the screen, her lips curving into a slight smile before she caught herself and tucked it away. "I need to get back to the office." "Don't wait up tonight. I have that work event on Saturday to prepare for." "The one you mentioned yesterday?" "I could drive you." "No need." She cut him off quickly. "It'll run late, and the timing is unpredictable." "I'll just grab a cab." Arthur studied his wife's face, noting the slight flush in her cheeks, the way her fingers fidgeted with her wedding ring, a nervous habit she'd developed recently. "At least let me pick you up afterward. We could grab a late dinner." "I said no, Arthur." Bethany's voice sharpened. "Why are you being so clingy lately?" "I can handle myself." The silence that followed felt heavy, charged with unspoken accusations. Bethany sighed, softening her tone slightly. "Look, I appreciate the thought, but I need to focus on my career right now. Not everyone can afford to take a creative sabbatical like you." Before Arthur could respond, she was gone, her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway. The front door opened and closed with finality, leaving Arthur alone with his thoughts and the hidden brochure that promised romance and reconnection. He pulled the glossy paper from his drawer, staring at the idyllic scenes that now seemed to mock him. When had things changed so dramatically between them? A year ago, Bethany had been struggling in her administrative role, her confidence at rock bottom. Arthur had pulled strings, called in favors, even arranged for certain individuals to ensure she got the position at Maxwell Corporation. He'd wanted to see her succeed, to help her find fulfillment. Now, as he looked at their separate desks in their shared office, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd helped create the very distance growing between them. The following Saturday arrived with a sense of foreboding. Arthur spent the morning pretending to work on his sustainable housing designs while actually watching Bethany prepare for her work event. She'd changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on a black cocktail dress that seemed unusually formal for a corporate function. "You don't want me to drive you?" Arthur asked one final time as she applied another coat of lipstick. For the last time now? Bethany checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting her hair. Why are you so obsessed with this? Don't you trust me? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Before Arthur could respond, her phone chimed with a notification. That's my ride, she said quickly, gathering her clutch. Don't wait up. Arthur watched from the window as Bethany slipped into a waiting cab, noting how she checked her phone again before they pulled away. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept wandering to all the small changes he'd noticed over the past months. The new passwords on her devices, the sudden work events, the way she angled her phone away from him when texting. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. Arthur decided to surprise Bethany with lunch the next day, hoping to bridge the growing gap between them. He spent Sunday morning preparing her favorite sandwich and selecting a bottle of wine from their collection. The house felt unnaturally quiet when he returned home early that afternoon. Bethany's car was gone, and his calls went straight to voicemail. He waited, trying to squash the growing unease in his stomach. When she finally burst through the door hours later, her hair slightly disheveled and her makeup smudged, Arthur was sitting in the living room, the untouched lunch spread out before him. Where were you? He asked quietly. Bethany froze, her eyes darting between Arthur and the food. I had errands to run. Why aren't you at work? I came home early to surprise you with lunch. Arthur gestured to the elaborate spread. But you weren't here, and you weren't answering your phone. You're monitoring my whereabouts now? Bethany's voice rose defensively. I don't need your permission to leave the house, Arthur. That's not what this is about, and you know it. Arthur stood slowly. You've been different lately. Distant. Secretive. Oh, here we go. Bethany threw her hands up. Because I'm finally focusing on my career instead of playing housewife. Something must be wrong. Not everyone can afford to take months off work to find themselves like you. The phone rang, cutting through their argument. Bethany glanced at the caller ID and answered, putting it on speaker out of habit. You're calling at the wrong time, Mom, she snapped. I don't care what you're doing. Dolores' sharp voice filled the room. You need to rein in your husband. He's still jobless, isn't he? When are you going to wake up and realize he's going nowhere? Arthur's face darkened. I can't hear you, Dolores. Good. Dolores retorted. Someone needs to tell you the truth. You're dragging my daughter down with your artistic pretensions and lazy lifestyle. Mom, please. Bethany started, but her protest lacked conviction. No, let her continue, Arthur said coldly. Clearly, you both have opinions about me you've been dying to share. You're useless and pitiful, just like your family. Bethany suddenly exploded, her carefully maintained facade cracking. At least Dominic has ambition. At least he knows what he wants and goes after it. The room fell silent. Arthur stared at his wife, the name Dominic hanging between them like a death knell. Who's Dominic? He asked quietly, though he already knew the answer in his heart. Bethany's face drained of color as she realized her slip. Dolores' voice came through the speaker, dripping with venom. Someone who appreciates her worth, unlike you and your worthless family. We haven't forgotten how your father cheated my brother out of his inheritance. So that's what this is about. Arthur's voice was dangerously calm. You're punishing me for ancient family history by encouraging our daughter to have an affair? Don't you dare blame this on my mother, Bethany hissed. You checked out of this marriage the moment you decided your precious architectural dreams were more important than providing for your wife. Providing? Arthur laughed bitterly. Who do you think got you that job at Maxwell Corp? Who called in favors, pulled strings, arranged meetings with the right people? I earned that position on my own merit. Keep telling yourself that. Arthur moved toward the door, his mind already formulating a plan. You and your mother deserve each other, Bethany. And this Dominic? I hope he's worth it. He left them standing there, Dolores still spewing vitriol through the phone, Bethany's mask of indignation finally cracking to reveal a flicker of fear. He had work to do, and he knew exactly where to start. The next morning, Arthur sat across from Maria Rodriguez in her sparse office, studying the sharp-featured woman who came highly recommended for discreet investigations. I need proof, he said simply, sliding an envelope across her desk. Everything you can find about my wife's relationship with a man named Dominic at Maxwell Corporation. Maria opened the envelope, counting the bills inside before fixing Arthur with a penetrating stare. You're sure you want to know? Some truths can't be unknown once they're revealed. I'm sure. Arthur met her gaze steadily. I need to know everything, where they meet, how long it's been going on, and most importantly, what they're planning. Maria nodded, making notes in a small notebook. What about the mother? Dolores, you said? Wanted to look into her too. Arthur considered this, remembering the years of subtle undermining, the snide comments, the way she'd poisoned Bethany against him. Yes, especially any connection to my family's past. She mentioned something about an inheritance dispute. It'll cost extra. Money isn't an issue. Arthur's lips curved into a cold smile. Despite what my wife and her mother think, I'm far from destitute. Maria raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. I'll have preliminary findings for you in 3 days. But remember, once you see these photos, these documents, there's no going back. I passed the point of no return the moment my wife said another man's name. Arthur replied, standing to leave. Now it's just a matter of deciding what to do about it. As he walked out of Maria's office, Arthur's phone buzzed with a text from Bethany, working late again. Don't wait up. He stared at the message, imagining her in another man's arms, laughing about her foolish husband who spent his days sketching buildings while she built her new life. Well, let them laugh. Soon enough, they'd learn that an architect's true skill lay not in building things up, but in calculating exactly where to place the charges that would bring everything crashing down. Chapter 2. The Web of Deceit. Arthur maintained his routine over the next few days, playing the role of the oblivious husband while Maria gathered evidence. He ate dinner alone, accepted Bethany's flimsy excuses, and pretended not to notice when she slipped away for emergency meetings that left traces of unfamiliar cologne on her clothes. When Maria finally called, her voice was grim. You should come to my office. There's something you need to see. The photographs spread across Maria's desk told a story in brutal detail. Bethany and a tall, well-dressed man, Dominic, caught in intimate moments across the city. Dinner at exclusive restaurants, stolen kisses in parking garages, disappearing into hotel elevators. His name is Dominic Pierce, Maria reported, her tone professional. Senior sales executive at Maxwell Corporation, known for his aggressive approach to both business and personal relationships. Arthur picked up a photo of Bethany gazing adoringly at Dominic across a candlelit table. How long? Based on my investigation, approximately 8 months. Maria pushed forward a detailed timeline. It started shortly after she got the promotion you helped arrange. Arthur's jaw tightened. Tell me about him. Dominic Pierce, age 38. Divorced twice. Both ex-wives filed complaints about emotional manipulation and financial exploitation, though nothing stuck legally. He has a pattern, targets women in vulnerable positions, helps advance their careers, then uses that leverage for his own gain. And Bethany? What's his angle with her? Maria hesitated, then pulled out another file. He's gunning for a vice president position. Bethany's department handles several major accounts he wants. Plus, she slid forward a bank statement. He believes she has access to significant family wealth. Arthur laughed humorlessly. Let me guess. My mother-in-law's been painting quite a picture. Dolores Harrison has been instrumental. Maria produced more documents. She's been meeting with Dominic privately, providing information about your family's finances, making promises about Bethany's inheritance. She's convinced him you're the only obstacle to their wealth. The inheritance dispute she mentioned? Maria nodded. I dug into that too. 20 years ago, your father and her brother were partners in a real estate venture. When it went south, your father managed to salvage his investment while her brother lost everything. Dolores blamed your family, claimed your father had inside information. She's been nursing that grudge ever since. Arthur absorbed this information, pieces clicking into place. She pushed Bethany toward Dominic deliberately. Didn't she? Based on these text messages? Maria tapped another file. She orchestrated the whole thing. Arranged their accidental meeting at a company function. Fed him information about your marriage. Coached Bethany on how to hide the affair. Arthur stood, pacing the small office. And Bethany? Does she know she's being manipulated? Hard to say. Maria shuffled through more photos. She seems genuinely infatuated with Dominic, but there's evidence she's starting to notice his pattern. Look at these. The newest photos showed subtle changes. Bethany's smile slightly strained, her body language more reserved. One image captured her expression as Dominic chatted with a young intern, a flash of uncertainty crossing her face. He's already laying groundwork with other potential targets, Maria confirmed. Classic pattern. Once he gets what he wants from Bethany, he'll move on. Arthur stared out Maria's office window, watching people hurry past on the street below. They think I'm weak, he said quietly. A dreamer who can't provide for his wife. They have no idea what I'm capable of. Maria studied him thoughtfully. What exactly are you capable of, Mr. Manning? Arthur turned, his expression cold. I'm an architect, Ms. Rodriguez. I understand structure, how to build things up, and more importantly, how to bring them down. Every building has weak points. So does every person. And your wife? What about her weak points? Bethany's greatest weakness is her pride. Arthur gathered the photos and documents. She'd rather die than admit she's being used. Her mother's the same way. They're so convinced of their own superiority, they can't see they're just pawns in someone else's game. And Dominic? Ambition. Arthur smiled grimly. He's so focused on climbing higher, he doesn't see the rungs rotting beneath him. Tell me, how much would it cost to get complete surveillance on all three of them? Every move, every meeting, every phone call. Maria named a figure that would have made most men flinch. Arthur didn't blink, simply nodded. Do it. I want to know everything. Their routines, their weaknesses, their secrets. But most importantly, he leaned forward. I want to know their plans, because whatever game they're playing, I intend to reset the board. As Arthur left Maria's office, his phone buzzed with another text from Bethany. Mom wants us to come to dinner this weekend. Says we need to talk about our future. Arthur smiled, imagining the scene that would unfold. Tell them I'll be there. He texted back. We definitely need to talk about our future. He tucked the photos and documents into his briefcase, his mind already formulating the next phase of his plan. The pieces were in place. Now it was time to begin the game. Chapter 3. The First Strike. The Maxwell Corporation building loomed before Arthur as he sat in his car, watching employees filter through the glass doors. He checked his watch, 9:15 a.m. Right on schedule, he spotted Bethany striding into the building, her red-soled heels clicking against the pavement, completely unaware of the storm about to break. His phone buzzed. A text from his old friend James Peterson, now VP of Human Resources at Maxwell Corporation. Everything's in place. Meeting scheduled for 10 a.m. Arthur allowed himself a small smile as he recalled their conversation from 2 days ago. The evidence had been damning. Documented proof of Bethany using company time for her affair, inappropriate use of company resources, and most crucially, emails revealing her sharing sensitive client information with Dominic to help him poach accounts. The security footage from the building's lobby showed Bethany stepping into the elevator, checking her makeup in its mirrored walls. In her suit and perfectly styled hair, she looked every inch the successful executive assistant she'd dreamed of becoming. Arthur wondered if she ever thought about who had helped her achieve that dream. At precisely 10:07 a.m., his phone buzzed again. This time it was Maria. Target is being escorted to HR. Second target spotted entering the building through parking garage. Arthur's jaw tightened. So, Dominic had arrived. Perfect. Through Maria's surveillance feed, Arthur watched the scene unfold in the HR conference room. Bethany sat rigid in her chair as James slid documents across the table, her face draining of color as she realized what they contained. These are serious violations of company policy, Mrs. Manning. James's voice came through clearly on the audio feed. The sharing of confidential client information alone is grounds for immediate termination. There must be some mistake, Bethany protested, her voice trembling. I would never. We have documented evidence of multiple policy violations. James cut her off smoothly. I'm afraid the company's position is quite clear on this matter. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings. Arthur watched as his wife's carefully constructed world crumbled around her. She didn't cry. Bethany never cried in public, but he could see her hands shaking as she gathered her things, could see the desperate glances she cast toward Dominic's office as security let her out. But Dominic never appeared. According to Maria's surveillance, he remained locked in his office, blinds drawn, ignoring Bethany's increasingly frantic texts. Arthur waited in his car until he saw Bethany emerge from the building, clutching a box of personal items. Her makeup was smeared now, her perfect composure shattered. She fumbled with her phone, probably calling her mother or Dominic. Arthur knew neither would answer. He'd made sure of that. That evening, Arthur sat in his home office, pretending to work on his latest architectural designs when Bethany burst through the door. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her carefully styled hair in disarray. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed, throwing her purse across the room. "I lost my job. You know I needed that job." Arthur looked up calmly from his drafting table. "You're right, you did need that job," he said coldly. "But you forgot who helped you get it in the first place." Bethany froze, realization dawning in her eyes. "What did you do?" "Me?" Arthur's voice was soft, dangerous. "I simply made sure the right people saw the evidence of your indiscretions. The security footage, the emails, the misuse of company resources. You did the rest yourself. Evidence? You were spying on me? Did you really think I didn't know about Dominic?" Arthur stood slowly. "About the work events that left you smelling of his cologne? About your mother's little matchmaking scheme?" "He'll help me," Bethany declared, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "Dominic will. Dominic hasn't answered your calls, has he?" Arthur interrupted. "He's probably too busy damage control, try to save his own position. Men like him don't stick around when things get difficult, Bethany. They move on to easier targets." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She sank into a chair, her dress crumpling. "My mother was right about you," she spat, but the words lacked conviction. "You're just like your father. Vindictive, cruel." "No, Bethany," Arthur cut her off. "I'm much worse than my father. He only took your uncle's money. I'm going to take everything." As if on cue, Bethany's phone rang. Dolores, finally returning her calls. Arthur watched as his wife answered, putting it on speaker out of habit. "What have you done?" Dolores screeched without preamble. "Do you know what this will do to our reputation? To our standing in the community?" "Mother, please," Bethany begged. "I need your help. Dominic isn't answering my calls, and—" "Dominic?" Dolores laughed bitterly. "He called me an hour ago to regretfully cancel all our dinner plans. Said he needs to distance himself from the situation. You've ruined everything." Arthur cleared his throat, making both women jump. "Hello, Dolores. How's that investment fund of yours doing? The one you and Bethany put most of your savings into?" There was a sudden, terrible silence on the other end of the line. "What did you do?" Dolores whispered. "Let's just say I had a very interesting conversation with your fund manager about some irregularities in the prospectus. The SEC is quite interested in his explanation. You haven't seen The Last of Us?" Dolores's voice rose to a shriek. "You think you've won, but we'll make your life a living hell." Arthur smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "No, Dolores. I'm going to make your lives a living hell. This is just the beginning." He ended the call, leaving Bethany staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. Gone was the dreamy architect she'd dismissed as weak. In his place stood a man she didn't recognize, cold, calculating, and utterly in control. "Why?" she whispered. "Why go to all this trouble?" Arthur gathered his drawings. The real ones, not the decoys he'd left lying around. The sustainable housing project that would revolutionize urban development, that would make him millions. The project he'd kept secret while they all underestimated him. "Because you and your mother needed to learn something, Bethany," he said as he packed his briefcase. "You never really knew me at all." As Arthur left the house that night, his phone buzzed one final time. A message from Maria. "Next phase ready when you are." But that would be tomorrow's battle. For now, Arthur Manning drove through the darkening city, satisfied with the day's victories. The foundation had been laid, the first walls toppled. Soon, very soon, they would all understand exactly what he was capable of building and destroying. Chapter 4. Turning the Tables. Arthur sat in his study, reviewing the latest batch of surveillance photos from Maria. The images showed Dominic at various corporate functions, his practice charm on display as he worked the room. But it was the subtle details that interested Arthur most. The way Dominic's attention lingered too long on certain female executives, the calculated manner in which he positioned himself near positions of power. "Your friend's been busy," Maria commented, pointing to a particular photo. 3 different women at the same charity gala, all in positions to help his career, of course. Arthur nodded, spreading the photos across his desk. And Bethany? Still trying to reach him. 57 calls in the past week, all unanswered. Maria pulled out her notebook. She's getting desperate. Started showing up at his office, making scenes in the lobby. Security's been called twice. Perfect. Arthur selected several photos, arranging them carefully. Time to turn up the heat. Over the next few days, anonymous emails began circulating through Maxwell Corp's executive offices. Nothing directly accusatory, just carefully worded concerns about Dominic's rapid rise, questions about his relationships with various female employees, subtle hints about his pattern of behavior. "Did you know about Jessica from accounting?" one email asked. "Or Sarah from marketing?" Asked them about their mentoring sessions with Mr. Pierce. Arthur watched through Maria's surveillance as the whispers spread, as suspicious glances followed Dominic through the hallways. The sales executive's confident stride developed a hint of tension, his trademark smile growing strained. Bethany's desperate attempts at reconciliation became more frequent. She appeared at their house at odd hours, alternating between tears and rage. "Please, Arthur," she begged one evening, mascara streaking her cheeks. "You have to help me. I made a mistake. I see that now." Arthur regarded her from behind his desk, his expression neutral. "A mistake? Is that what you call it?" "I was confused, unhappy. Dominic, he made me feel special. And now that he won't take your calls? Now that your mother's investment fund has crashed." Arthur's voice remained calm, even as he pressed the record button on his phone. "Tell me more about how Dominic made you feel special." Bethany didn't notice the recording light, too caught up in her own distress. "He said he loved me, that we'd be together. Mother said he was perfect for me, that he could give me the life I deserved, unlike your useless husband." "I didn't mean that." Bethany rushed to explain. "Mother was wrong about you, about everything. She pushed me toward Dominic, kept telling me I deserved better." Arthur let her talk, watching as she unknowingly provided more evidence of her mother's manipulation, of Dominic's calculated seduction. Each word was another nail in their collective coffin. The trap was set at Le Bernardin, an upscale restaurant known for its discretion and influential clientele. Arthur had reserved a corner table, perfect for the conversation to come. He'd made sure Dolores knew about the meeting through carefully planted gossip. Her predictable need to control her daughter's life would do the rest. Bethany arrived first, fidgeting with her water glass. Dominic appeared 10 minutes later, his usual polished appearance slightly frayed around the edges. "What's this about?" he demanded, glaring at Bethany. "I told you not to contact me." "Actually," Arthur spoke from behind him, "I arranged this meeting. Please sit down." Dominic's confidence faltered for a moment before his salesman's smile slid back into place. "Arthur, I suppose we should have this conversation eventually." "Yes, we should." Arthur gestured to the chair. "Let's discuss your pattern of pursuing vulnerable women. Jessica from accounting, for instance. Or perhaps Sarah from marketing." The color drained from Dominic's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No? What about Claire Thompson from your last company? The one who filed a harassment complaint before suddenly dropping it." Arthur pulled out a file. "Or Linda Martinez from the company before that." "You've been investigating me?" Dominic's voice rose sharply. "Mother." Bethany's startled voice cut through the tension. Dolores Harrison stood at their table, her face twisted with rage. "What are you doing to my daughter?" she demanded, glaring at Arthur. "Haven't you heard her enough?" "Me?" Arthur laughed softly. "That's rich coming from the woman who pushed her daughter into an affair. Tell me, Dolores, did you know about Dominic's history when you arranged their accidental meeting?" "I did what was best for my daughter," Dolores snapped. "Unlike you and your worthless family." "My family?" Arthur's voice carried through the suddenly quiet restaurant. You mean the family you've hated for 20 years because your brother lost his money in a bad investment? The family you've been trying to destroy through your daughter. You Mannings think you're so clever. Dolores spat. Your father cheated my brother. Your brother made a bad investment and lost. My father tried to help him, offered to buy him out before the market crashed. He refused out of pride, just like you're refusing to see what's right in front of you. What are you talking about? Arthur turned to Dominic. Why don't you tell them about your plans? About how you've been using Bethany's position to access client information? About the other women you're already pursuing? That's ridiculous, Dominic protested, but his eyes darted toward the exit. Is it? Then you won't mind explaining these photos? Arthur spread a series of images across the table, Dominic with various women, all in positions of influence. Or perhaps the emails you've been sending. The private meetings in your office? You bastard, Dominic snarled, his charming facade cracking. You've been spying on me? I've been protecting my interests. Something you should have thought about before you decided to use my wife as a stepping stone. Bethany stared at the photos, recognition dawning in her eyes. These are all from the past month. While you were telling me, you were too busy to talk. Oh, sweetheart, Dolores tried to intervene. I'm sure there's an explanation. The only explanation, Arthur cut in, is that you've both been played. Dominic here never cared about either of you. You were just means to an end. Bethany for her connections, and you, Dolores, for your supposed family wealth. Suppose? Dominic's head snapped up. You really should have done better research. Arthur smiled coldly. The Harrison fortune isn't quite what Dolores led you to believe, especially now that their investment fund has, shall we say, encountered some difficulties. The restaurant had gone silent. Dozens of influential people watching the drama unfold. Arthur knew that by morning, the story would be all over social media, the recording from his hidden devices providing irrefutable evidence of their schemes. You planned this, Bethany whispered, finally understanding. All of it. I learned from the best, Arthur replied, standing. You and your mother taught me so much about manipulation, about destroying people's lives. I just proved to be a better student than you expected. As he walked away, he heard Dominic and Dolores begin to argue, their voices rising as they turned on each other. Bethany sat silent, watching her carefully constructed world crumble around her. Chapter 5: Consequences and Collateral Damage. The aftermath of the restaurant confrontation spread through their social circles like wildfire. Arthur watched from a careful distance as Dominic's carefully constructed facade crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. The board called an emergency meeting this morning, Maria reported, handing Arthur a fresh set of surveillance photos. Dominic's been suspended pending an investigation into his conduct. The images showed Dominic leaving Maxwell Corp's building, security escorting him past a group of reporters. His usual confident stride had been replaced by a hunched shuffle, his suit looking somehow shabby under the camera flashes. And the others? Coming forward, just as we predicted. 3 former colleagues have filed formal complaints about his behavior. 2 more talking to lawyers. Maria's lips curved in a satisfied smile. The DA's office is particularly interested in some of his more creative accounting practices. Arthur nodded, scanning the morning's social media updates. The video from the restaurant had gone viral, Dominic's mask of charm cracking to reveal the calculating predator beneath. Comments flooded in from other women sharing similar experiences, each story adding another brick to the wall of evidence against him. Bethany hadn't fared much better. Her attempts to find new employment were met with polite but firm rejections. Her former colleagues avoided her calls, unwilling to risk association with such a public scandal. She tried to schedule lunch with Amanda from her old department, Maria noted, checking her phone. Amanda claimed a scheduling conflict. Actually told others she's afraid of being tainted by association. The isolation was clearly taking its toll. Through Maria's surveillance, Arthur observed Bethany's increasing desperation. The long hours spent alone in their house, the unanswered calls to former friends, the growing pile of rejection letters from potential employers. Dolores Harrison's fall from grace proved even more spectacular. The society pages that had once featured her charity work and social gatherings now ran stories about her role in the scandal. Her carefully cultivated image as a protective mother shattered, replaced by revelations about her manipulation of her daughter and her decades-long vendetta against the Manning family. "Your leak about the old family feud was particularly effective," Maria commented, showing Arthur the latest Society column. "People love a good grudge story, especially when it involves old money and failed investments." The article detailed Dolores' brother's financial disaster, painting a picture of a family consumed by bitterness and revenge. Former associates came forward with stories of Dolores' manipulative behavior, each revelation adding to her public humiliation. "She tried to attend the hospital board meeting yesterday," Maria reported. "They asked her to resign her position, said her presence would be detrimental to the institution's reputation." Arthur watched through surveillance footage as Dolores left the hospital, her usual imperious bearing crumbling as she faced the photographers waiting outside. The woman who had once ruled their social circle with an iron fist now hurried to her car like a fugitive. "There's something else," Maria added, her tone cautious. "Something about your reaction to all this." Arthur turned from the window. "Meaning? You're getting everything you wanted. They're all suffering, their lives in ruins. But you're not celebrating. If anything, you seem troubled." Arthur was silent for a long moment, staring at the photos spread across his desk. Bethany's tear-stained face as she left another failed job interview. Dominic's desperate attempts to salvage his career. Dolores' isolation from the society she'd once dominated. "Did you know Bethany used to volunteer at animal shelters?" he said finally. Before her mother convinced her it wasn't appropriate for someone of her station. She loved those animals, would spend hours just sitting with them. "You're feeling guilty?" "No." Arthur's voice hardened. "I'm remembering who she was before her mother poisoned her mind. Before Dominic saw her as a useful tool. They made her into this person, this stranger who could betray me so easily. That doesn't excuse what she did. No, it doesn't. But sometimes I wonder if I'm becoming just like them. Using people's weaknesses, manipulating their lives." He gestured to the surveillance photos. "Playing God with their futures." Maria studied him thoughtfully. "The difference is they hurt people for personal gain. You're exposing the truth about their actions. Everything they're suffering now is a direct result of their own choices. Is it? Or am I just telling myself that to justify my revenge?" Before Maria could respond, her phone buzzed with an alert. She checked the message, her expression growing serious. Speaking of consequences, she said, "We might have a problem. Someone's been asking questions about you at Maxwell Corporation." A former colleague of Dominic's, named Silas Mitchell. Arthur raised an eyebrow. "What kind of questions?" "The dangerous kind. About your involvement in Dominic's downfall, your financial status, your current projects." Maria pulled up a file on her tablet. "He's been particularly interested in your sustainable housing development." "What do we know about him?" "Former Army intelligence. Multiple deployments in cyber operations. Now works as a security consultant for various corporations." Maria's mouth tightened. "He's good at digging up secrets, Arthur. And he's very loyal to Dominic." Arthur absorbed this information, his moral questioning forgotten in the face of a new threat. "Keep watching him. I want to know everything. His movements, his contacts, his weaknesses." "Already on it." Maria gathered her files. "But Arthur, be careful. This isn't like dealing with Dominic or your in-laws. Silas Mitchell is a different kind of opponent." As Maria left, Arthur turned back to the window, watching the city below. The first phase of his revenge had succeeded beyond his expectations. But at what cost? And now, with this new player entering the game, how much further would he have to go? His phone buzzed with a text from Bethany. "Please, we need to talk. Things are getting worse. Mother's not handling this well." Arthur stared at the message, remembering the young woman who had once spent her weekends helping abandoned animals. Then he remembered her cruel words, her betrayal, her mother's vindictive plotting. "I'm sorry," he typed back, "but you made your choices. Now you have to live with them." He turned off his phone, returning to his work. The next phase of his plan required careful attention, especially with this new threat emerging. Silas Mitchell might be a formidable opponent, but Arthur had learned from the best. His own enemies had taught him how to destroy a person's life. And he was about to prove himself an excellent student once again. Chapter 6, The Counterattack. The first sign of Silas Mitchell's investigation came through Maria's surveillance network. Subtle inquiries about Arthur's past projects, careful probing of his financial records, discreet conversations with former colleagues. He's methodical, Maria reported, spreading surveillance photos across Arthur's desk. Military precision in his approach. He's building a complete profile of your life, your work, your connections. The photos showed a lean, sharp-featured man moving through the city with purposeful efficiency. In one image, he sat with a former client of Arthur's. In another, he studied blueprints of Arthur's previous projects. What's his angle? Arthur asked, examining the photos. He's focusing on your sustainable housing project, making calls to environmental groups, speaking with urban development critics. Maria pulled up a series of emails on her tablet. Look at these. Anonymous tips questioning the project's environmental impact, suggesting possible code violations. Arthur scanned the emails, noting the careful wording, the subtle implications of wrongdoing. He's trying to undermine the project's credibility. And succeeding. 3 potential investors have already pulled out. The Environmental Review Board is asking for additional studies. Maria's expression was grim. He knows what he's doing, Arthur. This is an amateur hour like Dominic's schemes. As if to emphasize her point, Arthur's phone buzzed with a news alert. A local environmental blog had published an exposé questioning the sustainability claims of his housing project. The article was filled with carefully worded allegations and anonymous sources. He's good, Arthur admitted, reading the article. Very good. That's not all. Maria pulled out more surveillance photos. He's been meeting with some interesting people. Look who had dinner at Morton's last night. The image showed Silas seated at a corner table with a group of rough-looking men. Local muscle, Maria explained. The kind you hire when you want to send a message. Arthur studied the photo, his expression hardening. He's escalating? We should consider additional security measures. These guys aren't just for show. They have records. Assault, vandalism, intimidation. As if on cue, Arthur's phone rang with a call from his project manager. Someone broke into the construction site last night. The man reported, his voice shaken. Graffiti all over the model homes. Messages about environmental fraud, corporate greed. They trashed the security office too. Arthur listened to the details, his mind already working through the implications. Send me photos of the damage. And double the security personnel. After ending the call, he turned to Maria. We need to know everything about Silas Mitchell. His past, his connections to Dominic, his vulnerabilities. Maria nodded, already typing on her laptop. I'll start with his military record. There might be something useful there. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. Arthur arrived at his office one morning to find his windows shattered, papers scattered across the floor. A crude message was spray-painted across his drafting table. Frauds get what they deserve. They're trying to scare you, Maria observed, documenting the damage. Make you lose focus, make mistakes. Arthur surveyed the destruction with cold detachment. They don't understand who they're dealing with. We've got something, Maria said, checking her phone. One of my contacts in military intelligence came through. Silas and Dominic go way back. They served together. There's more, but... She glanced at the cleaning crew. Not here. They met later at a quiet coffee shop, far from their usual haunts. Maria passed him a thick file. Silas Mitchell wasn't just Dominic's military buddy, she explained. They were involved in some questionable operations overseas. Intelligence gathering that crossed several lines. Dominic helped cover it up when things went wrong. Arthur flipped through the documents. This explains his loyalty. There's more? Maria leaned forward. Remember those thugs he hired? One of them talked to my contact. Silas isn't just trying to stop your project. He wants to destroy you completely. He's convinced you orchestrated everything to ruin Dominic. Which I did. Yes, but he can't prove it. That's why he's getting desperate. Maria pulled out more surveillance photos. He's been meeting with Bethany and Dolores too. Probably hoping they can give him something concrete to use against you. Arthur studied the images. Silas in intense conversation with Dolores at a dive bar. Meeting Bethany in a park. Both women looked desperate, clutching at any chance for revenge. They won't find anything, Arthur said confidently. I was too careful. Maybe, but Silas is escalating. These attacks on your property? They're just the beginning. He's going to keep pushing until something breaks. As if to prove her point, Arthur's phone buzzed with another alert. The local news had picked up the story about his project's environmental concerns. The reporter quoted anonymous sources, claiming the entire development was based on fraudulent data. "Your investors are going to start asking questions," Maria warned. "Let them." Arthur's voice was steel. "I've dealt with worse than Silas Mitchell." But the attacks continued, growing bolder. One morning, Arthur found his car's tires slashed. Another day, a brick sailed through his home office window. Each incident came with a message, a warning about consequences and justice. Maria increased security, installing new cameras, hiring additional guards. But Silas was too smart for direct confrontation. He worked through intermediaries, always maintaining plausible deniability. The pressure began to show in unexpected ways. Contractors started backing out of the project, citing scheduling conflicts. Suppliers delayed deliveries. Even some of Arthur's most loyal employees began looking nervous. "He's isolating you," Maria observed, "turning your professional relationships toxic, just like you did to Bethany." "With one key difference," Arthur countered. "I had truth on my side. Bethany and Dominic actually did the things I exposed. Silas is working with lies. Truth doesn't always matter in the court of public opinion. Look at this." She showed him a social media post gaining traction. A long thread detailing supposed evidence of corruption in Arthur's past projects. The claims were completely fabricated, but they were crafted skillfully enough to seem plausible. "We need to hit back," Arthur decided. "Not just defend, attack. What do we have on Silas?" Maria hesitated. "There's something. Those overseas operations I mentioned, they weren't just questionable. They were illegal. If certain details came to light." "Do it," Arthur commanded. "Use everything we have. I want Silas to understand exactly who he's dealing with." But as Maria left to set their counterattack in motion, Arthur couldn't shake a nagging feeling. He'd started this revenge plan to punish those who had betrayed him. Now he was locked in battle with a man he'd never met, fighting for a project that had become more symbol than substance. His phone buzzed, another threat, another warning. But this one was different. Attached was a photo of him leaving Maria's office, taken from close range. "We see you," the message read. "Both of you. Are you ready for what comes next?" Arthur stared at the image, realizing that Silas had finally crossed the line from professional attacks to personal threats. The game had changed, becoming more dangerous than even he had anticipated. He dialed Maria's number. "We need to meet. Now." Things are about to get much worse. As he waited for her response, Arthur gazed out at the city skyline, remembering how this all started, with a birthday surprise, a betrayal, a thirst for revenge. Now he was caught in an escalating war with a man who had nothing left to lose. The next move would decide everything. The question was, how far was he willing to go to win? But that would be another chapter, another battle in this ever-expanding war. For now, Arthur Manning sat in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of Silas's latest attack, and planned his response. The game wasn't over. It was merely entering its most dangerous phase. And Arthur intended to be ready when the final confrontation came. Chapter 7. The Final Gambit. Maria's voice crackled through Arthur's earpiece as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. "Target is approaching the location. 2 minutes out." Arthur checked his reflection one final time, noting how different he looked from the man who had once planned a romantic getaway to the Poconos. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, shaped by betrayal and revenge. "Remember," Maria continued, "Silas is ex-military intelligence. He'll be looking for traps." "That's exactly what we're counting on," Arthur replied, gathering his briefcase. The documents inside were carefully selected. Just enough truth to be convincing. Just enough lies to be devastating. The meeting location was a private conference room in an upscale hotel, chosen for its multiple exit points and excellent security cameras. Arthur had arrived early, ensuring everything was in place. The hidden recording devices, the security team positioned throughout the building, the police unit waiting discreetly nearby. Silas Mitchell arrived precisely on time, his military background evident in his bearing. He wore an expensive suit that didn't quite hide the warrior beneath. Mr. Manning, he said, extending his hand. Finally, we meet face to face. Arthur shook the offered hand, noting the calluses that spoke of regular weapons training. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for agreeing to this meeting. You made an interesting proposal. Silas settled into a chair, his eyes constantly scanning the room. A partnership in your sustainable housing project? Rather generous, considering our recent interactions. Business is business, Arthur replied smoothly. Your campaign against my project has been quite effective. I'd rather have you as an ally than an enemy. Silas's lips curved in a predatory smile. And the fact that I'm Dominic Pierce's oldest friend? That doesn't concern you, should it? Arthur opened his briefcase, removing a folder. I thought we could discuss that relationship, along with some other interesting connections. He slid the folder across the table. Silas opened it, his expression unchanging as he scanned the contents. Only a slight tightening around his eyes betrayed his reaction. Where did you get these? His voice remained steady, professional. The same place I got the evidence about Dominic's activities. Arthur leaned back, watching Silas process the implications. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate you as thoroughly as you investigated me? The documents laid bare Silas's military operations, the questionable intelligence gathering, the covered-up incidents, Dominic's role in burying the evidence. But more importantly, they revealed the ongoing connection. How Silas had used his security consulting business to help Dominic exploit vulnerable women, providing surveillance and blackmail material. This is classified information, Silas said quietly. Was classified, Arthur corrected. Amazing what money and connections can uncover. Your own techniques used against you. There's a certain poetry in that. Silas's hand moved toward his jacket, but Arthur's voice stopped him. I wouldn't. The police are already on their way. Those documents were anonymously delivered to them an hour ago, along with evidence of your recent activities. The vandalism, the hired thugs, the corporate espionage. You're bluffing. Am I? Arthur pulled out his phone, displaying a series of text messages. These are from your hired muscle. They were quite helpful once Maria explained their legal situation. Turns out they're not interested in adding federal charges to their records. Silas's mask cracked slightly. You set me up? Just like you tried to set me up? The difference is I did it better. Arthur stood, straightening his jacket. You see, while you were busy attacking my project, trying to pressure me into making mistakes, I was documenting everything. The harassment, the threats, the illegal surveillance. Police sirens became audible in the distance. Silas glanced toward the door, calculating his options. Don't, Arthur advised. The building is surrounded. And even if you escaped, where would you go? Your clients won't hire you once they learn about your illegal activities. Your security firm will collapse when these documents become public. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Silas's voice held a mixture of anger and grudging respect. I learned from the best, you, Dominic, Bethany, Dolores. You all taught me so much about manipulation and destruction. Arthur gathered his belongings as the sirens grew closer. Consider this your final lesson in consequences. The door burst open as police officers flooded the room. Silas remained seated, his military training evident in his controlled surrender. As they led him away, he turned back to Arthur. You won, he acknowledged. But at what cost? Look what you've become. Arthur watched him go, Maria appearing at his side. He's right, you know, she said softly. You're not the same man who hired me to investigate his wife's affair. No, Arthur agreed. I'm better. Outside, reporters had already gathered, alerted by strategic leaks about the arrest of a prominent security consultant. Arthur knew the story would spread quickly. Silas Mitchell, trusted corporate advisor, revealed as a criminal conspirator. The connection to Dominic would emerge, dragging both men's reputations further through the mud. What about Bethany and Dolores? Maria asked as they watched the media frenzy unfold. They'll be implicated too. Silas met with them several times, plotting against me. The surveillance photos prove it. Arthur's voice was cold. Their involvement in his criminal activities will destroy what little credibility they have left. Maria studied him thoughtfully. You planned this from the beginning, didn't you? Use Silas's investigation as a weapon against all of them. I told you, I'm a better student than they expected. Arthur checked his phone, noting the flood of messages from investors and supporters. The project will recover now. Silas's campaign against it will be discredited along with him. As they drove away from the scene, Arthur reflected on the path that had led him here. From a betrayed husband to a master manipulator, turning his enemies' weapons against them. The transformation was complete, but the cost that remained to be seen. Chapter 8. Rebuilding and Resolution. The arrest of Silas Mitchell dominated business news for weeks. Each day brought new revelations about his illegal activities, his connection to Dominic Pierce, and the network of corruption they had built together. Arthur's sustainable housing project, far from being damaged by the scandal, emerged stronger than ever. The investors are back, Maria reported, reviewing the latest contracts. They're calling it a triumph of ethical business over corruption. Your reputation as a visionary architect is secure. Arthur nodded, studying the updated designs for the development. The innovative eco-friendly features that had drawn Silas's attacks were now being hailed as revolutionary. Sustainability magazines wanted interviews, environmental groups offered partnerships, and potential clients flooded his office with requests. But success brought its own kind of emptiness. In quiet moments, Arthur found himself thinking about Bethany, not the woman who had betrayed him, but the one he had first fallen in love with. The one who had volunteered at animal shelters and dreamed of making a difference. "You've been distracted lately," Maria observed during one of their meetings. "Just thinking about cost," Arthur replied. "Not the financial kind. Having regrets?" "No, but I'm questioning what comes next. Revenge consumed me for so long. Now what?" Before Maria could respond, her phone buzzed. "Speaking of what comes next," she said, checking the message. "Sarah Thompson is here to see you." Sarah, one of Bethany's former colleagues at Maxwell Corporation. Arthur remembered her from his investigation into Dominic's activities. She had been one of the few who had seen through his charm. "Send her in." Sarah entered the office, carrying a thick folder. She had the determined look of someone who had wrestled with a difficult decision and finally made up their mind. "Mr. Manning," she began, "I have something you need to see." The folder contained emails, photos, and documents, evidence of Dominic's continued predatory behavior. Even after his public disgrace, he had started again in a new city, targeting vulnerable women with his practiced charm. "He never stops," Sarah explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I've been tracking him since he left Maxwell. New name, new look, but the same old tactics." Arthur examined the evidence. "Why bring this to me?" "Because you're the only one who managed to stop him. Actually stop him, not just make him move on to new victims." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I want to help you finish what you started." The old Arthur might have hesitated, might have questioned whether more revenge was the answer. But he had changed, learned to see opportunities where others saw ethical dilemmas. "Tell me everything you know," he said. Over the next few hours, Sarah laid out Dominic's new operation. He had reinvented himself as a business consultant, using his network of former contacts to gain introductions to wealthy divorcees and vulnerable businesswomen. "Classic predator adaptation," Maria commented, reviewing Sarah's information. "Changed his hunting grounds, but not his methods." "He's careful now," Sarah added. "Learned from his mistakes at Maxwell. But he still has weaknesses, his ego, his need for validation." Arthur found himself appreciating Sarah's analytical mind, the way she had gathered evidence while maintaining her cover as a sympathetic former colleague. "Why did you really track him?" he asked. "There's more to this than professional concern." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "My sister," she finally said. "She was one of his victims at his previous company. The harassment complaint that mysteriously went away. That was her. She couldn't handle the aftermath. Had to move across the country to escape the gossip and shame." Understanding dawned. "You want justice?" "I want him stopped. Permanently." Sarah's voice hardened. "Your exposure at Maxwell hurt him, but he recovered. I want to make sure he can never hurt another woman again." Arthur studied her, seeing something familiar in her controlled anger, her planning. She had gone through her own transformation, driven by a similar need for justice. "We'll need to be careful," he said. "He's more cautious now, more paranoid. I can help with that." Sarah pulled out more documents. "I've maintained contact, played the role of the sympathetic friend. He trusts me? The irony wasn't lost on Arthur. Once again, he was working with a woman to destroy someone who had betrayed trust. But this time felt different. This wasn't just about revenge, but about prevention, about protecting future victims. As they worked late into the night, Arthur found himself watching Sarah. Her passionate commitment to justice, her sharp intelligence, her quiet strength. She was nothing like Bethany, yet she awakened something in him he thought had died with his marriage. The ability to connect with someone on a deeper level. "You're staring," she noted without looking up from her work. "Just appreciating a kindred spirit," he replied honestly. Sarah met his gaze, a moment of understanding passing between them. They were both damaged people, transformed by betrayal into something harder, but also more purposeful. "I should go," she said, gathering her things. "It's late. Have dinner with me tomorrow," Arthur found himself saying. Not to discuss Dominic. Just dinner. Sarah paused at the door, studying him. "You're ready for that?" "No," he admitted, "but I'm ready to find out." After she left, Maria emerged from her office. "Well, that was interesting." "Don't start," Arthur warned. "I'm just saying, there's a certain symmetry to it. Both of you turned your pain into purpose." Maria began shutting down her computers. "Maybe that's what comes next." Arthur stood at his office window, watching Sarah cross the parking lot below. For the first time in months, he felt something besides the cold satisfaction of revenge, a warmth, a possibility. "Maybe," he agreed softly. "Maybe that's exactly what comes next." Chapter 9, The New Dawn. The sustainable housing project rose from the ground over the next year, each building a testament to innovation and resilience. Arthur stood at the site regularly, watching his vision take shape, but his focus had shifted. The project was no longer just about proving his success to those who had doubted him. It had become about legacy, about creating something meaningful. The first families move in next month, he told Sarah over dinner at their favorite restaurant. Their relationship had evolved naturally, built on shared understanding and purpose rather than the desperate passion that had marked his marriage to Bethany. "They'll be part of something revolutionary," Sarah replied, her eyes bright with genuine enthusiasm. "Not just sustainable housing, but a real community." Their collaboration on exposing Dominic's new schemes had deepened into something more meaningful. Sarah's analytical mind complemented Arthur's strategic thinking, her compassion balancing his harder edges. News of Bethany occasionally reached them through the gossip networks. She had moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of town, taking a job as a receptionist, a humbling return to where she had started before Arthur helped her career. "She tried to contact you again," Maria reported during one of their regular meetings. "Sent a letter to the office." Arthur glanced at the unopened envelope on his desk. "The same as the others?" "Probably. Apologies, regrets, requests for help." Maria shrugged. "Want me to send the usual response?" "No," Arthur decided after a moment. "No response this time. She needs to accept that chapter is closed." Dolores had fared worse than her daughter. The society pages that had once featured her charity work now ignored her completely. She had become a cautionary tale in their social circles, mentioned in whispers as an example of pride's downfall. Dominic's attempt at reinvention had crumbled under the weight of Sarah's evidence. Their careful exposure of his new schemes, combined with testimony from his recent victims, had led to legal charges this time. He faced years in prison, his charming facade finally shattered beyond repair. "You should be proud," Sarah told Arthur as they walked through the nearly completed housing development. "You've created something lasting here." Arthur squeezed her hand, appreciating how she understood him. Not just the architect or the man who had orchestrated an elaborate revenge, but the person he was becoming. "We've created something," he corrected. "I couldn't have moved forward without you." Their footsteps echoed through the model home, its innovative design incorporating natural light and sustainable materials. This was his real triumph. Not the destruction of his enemies, but the creation of something positive from the ashes of betrayal. Maria joined them later at the site office, bringing updates on their various ongoing projects. She had evolved from private investigator to trusted advisor, helping guide the company's expansion into new areas of sustainable development. "The environmental impact reports are overwhelming positive," she reported. You're changing the way people think about urban housing. Arthur nodded, but his attention was drawn to Sarah, who was explaining the community garden concept to a group of potential residents. She had found her own path to healing by helping others, turning her experience with Dominic into motivation to create positive change. You know, Maria observed, following his gaze, revenge may have started you on this path, but it's not what kept you going. No, Arthur agreed. It's not. The sun was setting behind the development's solar panels as Arthur locked up the site office. He had a dinner reservation with Sarah, a quiet celebration of their own. In his pocket was a small box from the jeweler. Not an engagement ring, not yet, but a promise of possibility. As he drove home to change, Arthur passed the street where he used to live with Bethany. The house had new owners now, the memories of betrayal and revenge fading like old photographs. He felt no urge to slow down or look back. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Don't forget, animal shelter fundraiser this weekend. Still can't believe you agreed to volunteer. Arthur smiled, remembering how Bethany had once loved working with abandoned animals. Life had a way of coming full circle, but this time the motivation was pure. Not an attempt to maintain appearances or satisfy social obligations, but a genuine desire to make a difference. The revenge that had consumed him had served its purpose, burning away his naivete and forcing him to evolve. But it was the aftermath, the rebuilding, the healing, the unexpected connection with Sarah that had truly transformed him. He arrived home to find Sarah waiting on his doorstep, a bottle of wine in hand and plans for their next community project already forming in her mind. This was his new dawn, not the cold satisfaction of revenge, but the warm possibility of redemption, of building something meaningful with someone who understood both his darkness and his light. Ready for what's next? She asked as he approached. Arthur took her hand, feeling the weight of the promise in his pocket. More ready than I've ever been. Together they walked into his home, their conversation flowing naturally between personal plans and professional projects. This was what he had been missing during his years with Bethany. Genuine partnership, mutual understanding, shared purpose. A news alert on his phone caught his attention. Another article about Dominic's latest legal troubles. His attempt to reinvent himself had backfired spectacularly, each new identity crumbling faster than the last. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and charmed executives now faced a string of fraud charges across multiple states. Still following his story? Sarah asked, noting his expression. Last time, Arthur promised, putting the phone away. Some habits are hard to break. Speaking of which, Sarah pulled out her tablet. I've been thinking about expanding the community center project. What if we added a women's resource center? A place where people like my sister could find support and guidance? Arthur studied the preliminary plans she had drawn up, appreciating how she channeled her own pain into constructive action. Show me what you have in mind. As they worked through the details, Arthur's thoughts drifted briefly to Bethany. He had heard through business circles that she was trying to rebuild her life, taking night classes and seeking counseling. Part of him hoped she would succeed, not for any lingering affection, but because her story served as a warning about the cost of betrayal and the importance of genuine redemption. Dolores, in contrast, had never sought redemption. She clung to her bitterness, becoming a recluse in her modest apartment, her social media filled with vague accusations and self-pitying posts. Her influence had evaporated, her former friends avoiding any association with her toxic presence. I saw Bethany yesterday, Sarah mentioned casually, pulling Arthur from his thoughts. At the grocery store. She looked different, humbled. Did she see you? Yes. She started to approach, then stopped herself. I think she finally understands that some bridges can be rebuilt. Arthur nodded, feeling the last traces of his old life falling away. The revenge that had driven him had served its purpose, transforming him from a betrayed husband into someone stronger, more purposeful. But it was the aftermath, the building of something meaningful, the connection with Sarah, the chance to make a real difference, that had truly healed him. His sustainable housing project had become a model for urban development, attracting attention from cities across the country. Each new project incorporated lessons learned from the first, creating communities that were both environmentally conscious and socially connected. Maria had evolved along with him. Her investigative skills now focused on vetting potential partners and ensuring their projects maintained ethical standards. She had become more than an employee. She was a trusted friend who had witnessed his transformation from victim to victor to visionary. You know what's funny? Sarah said as they finished their work for the evening. If Bethany hadn't betrayed you, if Dominic hadn't been so ruthless, if Dolores hadn't been so manipulative, none of this would exist. Sometimes destruction leads to creation. As long as you don't let the destruction consume you, Arthur replied, thinking of how close he had come to losing himself in revenge. Their evening wound down naturally, the conversation shifting from work to personal matters. Arthur touched the small box in his pocket, knowing the time wasn't quite right, but feeling the promise of it. Soon, but not tonight. They had both learned the value of building something solid, something real. As Sarah gathered her things to leave, Arthur stood at his window, looking out at the city he was helping to transform. His legacy wouldn't be the revenge he had exacted, but the communities he had built, the lives he had touched, the positive change he had created from the ashes of betrayal. Same time tomorrow? Sarah asked from the doorway. Arthur turned to her, seeing his future in her understanding smile. Tomorrow and all the tomorrows after. She left with a gentle kiss, both of them secure in the knowledge that their relationship was built on truth and mutual respect, not the shallow foundations that had doomed his marriage to Bethany. Later that night, as Arthur reviewed plans for their next project, he received one final news alert. Dominic had been sentenced, his pattern of fraud and manipulation finally catching up with him. The article included a photo of him being led away in handcuffs, his trademark charm replaced by defeated resignation. Arthur closed the alert without reading further. That chapter of his life was finished. He had more important things to focus on: the future he was building with Sarah, the communities they were creating, the lives they were changing. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Just had an idea for the resource center. Call you in the morning? Arthur smiled, typing his response. This was his redemption, not in forgiveness of those who had wronged him, but in creating something meaningful from the wreckage they had left behind. His revenge had been complete, but his redemption was ongoing, built one project, one relationship, one day at a time. He turned off his computer and prepared for bed, at peace with the man he had become. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that the best revenge wasn't destruction, but creation. With Sarah by his side and his vision clear, he was ready for whatever came next. Epilogue. 10 years later, Arthur Manning stood at the podium of the National Sustainable Development Conference, addressing a packed auditorium of architects, developers, and environmental innovators. His sustainable housing project, once the target of Silas Mitchell's smear campaign, had evolved into Manning's Sustainable Communities, a corporation that had revolutionized urban development across the country. 10 years ago, we started with a simple idea, he told the audience. Create homes that not only protect our environment, but build genuine communities. Today, our developments house over 50,000 families in 15 cities. Sarah Manning, his wife of 8 years, watched from the front row, their 6-year-old daughter Emma beside her. The child had inherited her father's analytical mind and her mother's compassionate heart, already showing interest in the family business during their site visits. After his speech, Arthur joined them in the conference center's garden, where Sarah was explaining to Emma how the building's vertical gardens worked. Their relationship had deepened over the years, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the superficial attraction that had characterized his marriage to Bethany. "Daddy!" Emma ran to him, clutching a sketch she'd made of a future eco-house, complete with solar panels and what appeared to be a rocket launcher. "Can we build this one? Maybe without the weapons systems." He laughed, scooping her up. "Though your Aunt Maria might approve." Maria Rodriguez, who had long since moved from private investigator to chief security officer of Manning Sustainable Communities, approached them with her tablet in hand. The years had added silver streaks to her dark hair, but her sharp intelligence remained unchanged. "Speaking of approval," she said, "the background checks on the new investment partners came back clean. And the Women's Resource Center in Portland is ready for its grand opening next month." The Resource Center was Sarah's pride and joy, one of 12 such facilities they'd established across the country. Each center provided support, job training, and legal assistance to women escaping abusive relationships. The project had grown from Sarah's experience with her sister and Dominic's victims, transforming pain into purpose. "Anywhere on our old friends?" Arthur asked quietly, after Emma had run off to explore the garden. Maria nodded, pulling up her secure files. Their original agreement to monitor certain individuals had evolved into an early warning system, protecting their business interests while keeping tabs on potential threats. "Dominic was released from prison last month," she reported. "He tried reaching out to some old contacts, but his reputation's poison. Nobody will touch him. Last seen working as a car salesman in Nevada under his mother's maiden name." Arthur nodded, feeling no satisfaction or anger, just a distant acknowledgement of justice served. "Bethany? Still working at that dental office in Cincinnati. She's gotten her life together, actually. Went back to school, got a degree in social work. Volunteers at a domestic violence shelter." Maria's lips curved slightly. Ironic considering her past, but people can change. "And Dolores? Living in a retirement community in Florida. Still bitter, still posting conspiracy theories about your family on social media, but nobody pays attention anymore. Her monthly allowance from the trust you set up arrives on time, though she doesn't know it comes from you." That had been one of Arthur's more complex decisions, ensuring Dolores had enough to live on while preventing her from causing further harm. The trust was anonymous, managed through layers of corporations, providing basic comfort without enabling her toxic behavior. "And Silas?" Sarah asked, joining them. "Released 3 years ago. Keeps to himself, working as a security consultant for small businesses in Seattle. Seems to have learned his lesson about crossing legal lines." Maria closed her files. "None of them pose any threat to us now." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's return, excited about the butterfly garden she'd discovered. As Arthur watched his daughter describe her findings, he reflected on how different his life was from the man who had once plotted elaborate revenge. Later that evening, at a private dinner celebrating the conference's success, Sarah raised her glass to address their gathered executives and partners. 10 years ago, Manning Sustainable Communities rose from a crisis that could have destroyed everything, she said. But instead of letting bitterness define us, we chose to build something meaningful. Today, we don't just construct buildings. We create communities, support the vulnerable, and protect our environment. Arthur squeezed her hand, remembering the path that had led them here. The Women's Resource Centers had helped thousands, many of them sharing stories similar to Sarah's sister and Bethany. Some of their most successful community programs had grown from lessons learned during their darkest times. Maria joined them after dinner, bringing updates on their latest projects. She had transformed their security division into an industry leader in corporate ethics and protection, using her investigative skills to prevent the kind of manipulation and abuse they'd once exposed. "Remember when you hired me to track your unfaithful wife?" she mused, sipping her wine. "Who would have thought it would lead to all this?" "Life has a way of surprising us," Sarah replied. "Speaking of surprises, tell them your news." Maria smiled, uncharacteristically shy. "I'm starting my own consulting firm, specializing in helping companies prevent and expose corporate abuse. Manning Sustainable Communities will be my first client." "About time," Arthur said warmly. "You've earned it." As they discussed Maria's plans, Arthur's phone buzzed with a message from one of their Portland project managers. The Women's Resource Center had received an anonymous donation, a substantial one. The attached note simply read, "For those who need a second chance." He showed the message to Sarah, who nodded understanding. "Should we accept it?" "Yes," Arthur decided. "Some debts can only be repaid by helping others." Their conversation turned to future projects, new communities planned, more resource centers to build, innovative environmental technologies to implement. Emma had fallen asleep in her chair, her sketch of the Eco House still clutched in her hand. "She's going to take over the company one day," Sarah predicted, smoothing their daughter's hair. "And probably improve everything we've built," Arthur agreed. The next morning, driving to their main office, Arthur passed through one of their first developments. The community had matured beautifully, trees grown tall, gardens flourishing, neighbors chatting in shared spaces. Children played in the safe streets while parents worked in the community's co-working spaces. In his office, he found Emma had pinned her eco-house sketch to his bulletin board, right next to the first blueprint he'd drawn for the sustainable housing project. The contrast between them made him smile, his beside her childish creativity, both reaching for the same goal. Sarah joined him for their morning meeting, bringing updates from their various charitable initiatives. The Women's Resource Centers were expanding their programs, offering more services and reaching more people. Their environmental education projects were being adopted by schools nationwide. "We received another letter from Bethany," she mentioned carefully. Arthur nodded, unsurprised. Over the years, Bethany had written occasionally, not seeking reconciliation or help, but sharing stories of her work with abuse survivors. Her last letter had described helping a woman escape a relationship with someone remarkably like Dominic. "She's found her way," he said simply. "We all have," Sarah agreed. "Just not the ways we expected." Their day continued with meetings, site visits, and planning sessions. Manning Sustainable Communities had grown beyond Arthur's original vision, becoming a force for positive change in ways he couldn't have imagined during those dark days of revenge and betrayal. That evening, at home, Arthur watched Emma showing Sarah her latest design ideas. His daughter's imagination combined with his wife's practical compassion represented everything good that had emerged from his past pain. Maria called with her nightly security update. All operations normal, all threats minimal. She added that Dominic's car dealership had gone out of business, while Bethany's shelter had received additional funding for expansion. Life continued its cycle of consequences and opportunities. Later, reviewing the day's reports, Arthur found himself remembering the man he'd been, betrayed husband, planner of revenge, architect of destruction. That man had been necessary for a time, but letting him go had been the key to true success. Sarah found him in his study, lost in thought. Remembering or planning? She asked, knowing him well enough to read his moods. "Both," he admitted. "Thinking about how revenge brought me to the brink of becoming everything I hated. But you chose a different path," she reminded him. "We both did." Emma's voice called from the hallway, excited about something she'd discovered in her science homework. Arthur and Sarah shared a smile, recognizing the moment for what it was. Not an interruption, but a reminder of what really mattered. As they helped their daughter with her project, Arthur reflected on life's strange trajectories. His greatest triumph hadn't been destroying his enemies, but building something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. Manning Sustainable Communities stood as proof that the best revenge wasn't destruction at all. It was creation, growth, and positive change. The man who had once plotted elaborate schemes of vengeance now dedicated his life to building homes, supporting the vulnerable, and protecting the environment. His daughter would inherit not just a successful company, but a legacy of turning pain into purpose. Sarah caught his eye across their kitchen table, understanding in her smile. They had both been wounded by betrayal, both sought justice in their own ways. But together, they discovered something more powerful than revenge: the ability to create positive change in the world. Emma proudly displayed her completed science project, a model showing how their community's solar systems worked. Arthur hugged his daughter, grateful for all the twists of fate that had led to this moment. Outside, the city lights twinkled across neighborhoods their company had helped build. Somewhere out there, Bethany helped other women rebuild their lives. Dominic faced the consequences of his actions, and Dolores lived with her bitterness. But here, in this home, surrounded by family and purpose, Arthur Manning had found something better than revenge. He had found peace. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.